Okay, so today we're going to be looking at something that's maybe a little bit controversial. There's been quite a few mixers on YouTube that have said that they feel that too many plugins can be a bad thing. Paul Third is one that comes to mind. I think Paul's great, and I think his channel's great. I watch it with interest. But I don't agree about this point, and I'm going to explain why that is. Having said that, I mean, I do agree really that if you have too many plugins, you can get lost in plugins. If you don't know what you're doing with them and you just get caught up in using too many, and you don't have a purpose behind it, yeah, okay, you can get lost in it and you can end up not mixing as well. But I find that having this variety is a big part of what makes 21st century mixing so great. So I come from the analog world. I learned my craft on in analog studios, on analog gear, mixing to tape. I know that world, I know that sound really well. I know exactly what the limitations are and the advantages. And mixing now, as I have been for quite a long time in the digital world, with the emulations that we have now that sound just absolutely fantastic, there's huge advantages, I find, to being able to have a variety of different plugins, and today we're going to be looking at consoles. If you're mixing analog, if you're lucky enough to have a good console like an SSL or a Neve, or an API or something like on that level, then fantastic. But they all have a sound. They all have a really different and distinct sound. Not just running things through the desk without any EQ or anything else. They sound different. And that adds up over all the channels. But even more so, the EQs and the compressors all sound really different. But it's not just that. If you're in one studio, the sound of that console is gonna, whatever style you have as a mixer, is gonna move you in a certain direction. Certain things are going to be possible and certain things aren't going to be as possible on that particular console. You've got the console you've got. Now you can pick and choose whatever you need. So if I'm working on some drums and I think SSL is going to do it for this, or I might think, actually, no, I think, you know, it's Neve for this particular track on the drums, I can just do that. And it doesn't mean I have to use that console for everything. I can go to a different console for the bass, keyboards, vocals, whatever, and just craft exactly what I am hearing, what I need. I'm not stuck with the limitations of, however good it is, one console sound for everything. And I think that is one of the key differences and advantages to mixing in the digital world in the 21st century, is that we have this palette of colors. And as long as you learn the sounds, you know what the sounds are, you can really use them to your advantage, and you can take mixes to places that they never could have gone in the analog world. Bringing those analog flavors in, yes, but releasing yourself from the limitations of actual analog hardware. And this is what we're going to look at, and specifically I'm going to show you just how different consoles sound on a drum kit, but also it's not just the sound, it's the layout and the EQs, and what the EQs are capable of move you in a different direction just naturally. Once you start EQing, you cannot make one of these consoles sound like the other ones. They all do something different. They all sound different, even with similar EQ settings. And this is really key, because you're going to see how I'm going to get several different drum sounds by using different consoles. And it's the same mixer, and you can see how the consoles just take you naturally to a different place, because you move naturally towards what it is that's great sounding about that console, and what the EQs really, where their sweet spots are all different. They'll move you to a different place, and this is what the key thing is here. Learning those sounds, learning those tools means you've got this fantastic toolkit, and you can grab this one when you need it, and that one, and that one. And yeah, I think it's fantastic. But it does require that you understand what they do, and this is what we're going to be looking at here, and I hope that's going to be helpful to you to hear the differences and look at some of the real advantages of each of these consoles. Before we get started, if you can like the video and subscribe, ring the bell and press the thanks button. That's really helpful for keeping the channel going and really appreciated. So let's have a look. They're tried and tested. That's why they're famous consoles. You know, a lot of consoles are made that didn't necessarily become famous. These became famous because the curves they had and the other aspects they had just really sounded great. You know, some people might feel, well, why couldn't I just get the same thing from Kirchhoff or Pro Q3, just a clean EQ, in other words? Surely you could recreate the same curves, but why have to recreate that painstakingly in a digital EQ when you just got it here already? Plus, there's other things that you can't just recreate with a clean EQ, like the saturation. And the saturation is not necessarily so simple. It's not just a straightforward saturation. It's quite complex and it changes depending on what else you do in the plugin. If you look at it in Plugin Doctor, it's not just like a static set of harmonics. The EQs increase the saturation in a particular way, and all of that sort of thing is part of the sound and has been modeled. So again, you couldn't really create that in the same way with a separate saturation plugin. And then finally, you've got the compressor, and the compressors are really very different on each of these. So I'm going to start with the solid state logic, and I'll just explain that I deliberately did not try to make each of these sound the same. I didn't set the controls the same. My purpose in this was saying, where does an SSLE series take you? If I want to get a good kick drum sound, I know I can get to one quickly with any of these consoles, but I don't necessarily do it the same way, because each one brings something different and each one can give me a different flavor of kick drum. And so I'm going to go through each one and just show you what I quickly came to with each of these, and you can hear how different they sound. So I'm going to start without anything, so you can just hear what the kick drums are like with nothing apart from a gate. And then I'm going to, I'm not using these for gates. And then I'm going to bring this one in, and then I'll go through the others so you can hear how they sound different. Okay, so without anything on it first. So not a bad kick drum sound. It's got some low end. It's a bit too clicky for my liking. For this particular track, it might be fine to be that clicky for some tracks. For this one, to me, it was sticking out too much, so I want to tame that click. I'd like a more beefy low end for this track. It's got a rocky element to it, and I think it could really do with a nice solid low end. Because the bass is also, it's an unusual sounding bass guitar that I think needs a really solid, deep kick below it to give the whole track that kind of really solid low end. So that's what I'm going for, and I'm gonna bring this in, and then I'll show you kind of what I've done with it. So you can hear how it's got a really solid low end. I've tamed the click, and I've kind of actually lowered the click a bit. So I've boosted some mids down here to kind of bring out a lower part of the click while pulling back on the clicky bit I didn't like so much. So that's the SSL. Bring in the compressor now so you can hear what that is like. So you can hear what that does. Now, to me, I've never gotten on with the E-Series compressor very well. I know some people really like it. I've just never found that it does what I want it to do. But that's just me. But you can hear what it sounds like. And you can hear that, compressor aside, you know, I'm getting what I think is a really nice kick drum sound out of this that I would struggle to get with a clean EQ, or wouldn't get the same sound as you'll hear from any of these other ones. It's also got saturation. I've got some saturation on there, and that is adding thickness to it. So let's move over now to this API and see what that's like. I'll start with that out and then bring it in. So really different. I'm just going to jump back to the SSL again. Very different effect. And to me, you know, this just is the classic SL sound to it. And every time I use this on drums, I get that sound. And even if I do different settings, it always has that kind of sound to it. Something about the shapes of the EQs, something about the saturation. And this sounds really different. Of course, you can change the sound a lot and so forth. But right away, I honed in on a different kick drum sound, which to me is equally good, but yeah, a different approach. So I'm just going to go back to this one again and listen to the compressor, which I'm not using yet. So a lot of different flavors there, all sounding good and different. I mean, it gets super tight if you pull out the feedback and it goes to feed forward. But with feedback, it's a really, you know, there's a lot of weight there and a lot of more body adding in, and it kind of contains the middle part of the kick nicely, but kind of brings the presence of it forward. Really, just a really nice effect. I can't get this kind of effect at all out of the compressor here. Just very different kettle of fish. So different EQ, different compressor right away without a lot of fiddling. You're there. I mean, I started with that compressor thing pretty much from scratch and just dialed it in very quick. So let's move over now to this Neve. Really, really different from the others. I'm just going to jump back to those other ones. Again, I've set it up differently as well, but it's the way that the EQs sound that you hone in on. I find myself honing in very quickly in a very different approach because of what the EQ is good at doing and what special kind of qualities it has. You kind of hone in on that really, you know, thick low end that a Neve has, because quickly that happens when you start turning up the low end in a way that you don't get with the other two. I'm just going to jump around between these different ones, and then I'll show you the compressor on this one. So starting with this one. And let's bring in the compressor here. I mean, yes, I'm boosting. Again, just to be clear, I am not trying to make these sound like each other. I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm using each one to bring out what, to me, each one is good at doing. And you can't make one sound exactly like the other. They never will. But if you just go with what naturally they're good at, you very quickly, with just very few turns of the knob, you start getting that nice sound that the console moves you towards. Now I'm just going to bring in the compressor here. So even more low end coming from that compressor. You know, you can't really make these console strips sound exactly like each other. They all sound different. They've got different saturation and different EQ curves. And as I said, I'm really not trying to make these sound like each other. I'm deliberately not. I'm going for what they naturally sound good at and what the controls naturally bring you to in terms of what each console brings of its own sound. And that's where I very quickly went to with this Neve that I wouldn't have been able to get to with the others anyway. But even if I boosted the low end that much, I wouldn't have done, because I wouldn't get a sound I wanted. I wouldn't get a sound that really works that well for me. Whereas this one I know it will. And I boosted this a huge amount because I know that that low end on a Neve just sounds really special in that sort of Neve-y way. Okay, so I'm going to move over now finally to this Amek, and let's see what this one sounds like. Very different again. And again, I don't have the controls the same, but this is where I got to very quickly with this, just by following my general intuition about how I wanted the kick drum, but also what sounded good with this EQ. So I'm going to now jump between all four of them, and you can just hear the difference, and then I'll just pop in the EQ on this one. You can hear what that's like. I mean, sorry, the compressor. So start with this one. So I had that one a little bit too loud, but again, this has loads of really weighty low end in it. So I'm going to put in the compressor and maybe the limiter as well. So a lot of different flavors there between the compressor and the limiter, both which can easily give you a very snappy, clicky, punchy sound, which I'm not going to get out of any of these. I mean, they all sound different. Their compressors each sound really very different from each other. So there goes to show you like what difference the they have in sound, and also the difference that you're just going to get to quicker with each one, because they all do a certain thing. The EQs quickly take you to a certain place where they sound good if you follow what sounds nice as you're changing the dials. And it's the same with the compressors. You find the sweet spot on the compressor of each one and you get something really different. So I'm just going to do a quick thing now on snare to show you a similar kind of thing, just so you can hear on snare the kind of differences you get. These I'm going to use one different one. I'm going to use this Focusrite one here instead of the Neve. And the reason being, the honest truth is that I don't like using this one, even though it sounds nice. The sound that it has, I don't actually need all that often, and if I do, I will use it. But I don't like the fact that everything on this is upside down. And, ergonomics is important. If you had this actual console, of course, you'd learn it because it's what you were using all the time every day. But when you're jumping between loads of different plugins, I mean, I just don't need to have to rethink the whole thing. Everything's upside down on this one in terms of the controls. And I just, I don't have the brain bandwidth to worry about it when I can move on to another tool, if you see what I mean. I tend not to use this. And I think ergonomics are important. I really don't think Brainworx should have modeled the ergonomics of this on the original one, or at least have an option. Maybe you could click to have an ergonomics that was the same as almost every other console, modern console, instead of, if people really want the original one because they're actually used to it, fine, but maybe that's asking too much. Anyway, I find it a bit of a pain, so I don't tend to use it that much. So let's start with this one here. I'm going to bring this one in, hear the snare without anything on it. So again, not at all a bad snare sound, but it would be nice if it had a bit more body to it. So that's what I'm going to go for. So immediately to my ears, it's got that kind of SSL sound to it. I actually pulled down the highs here because I felt they were a little bit too fizzy. And I'm just going to bring in the compressor now. So again, I never find myself using these SSL compressors, which is just me because a lot of people love them, but I just don't get what I need out of them very easily. So now but the EQ sounds great to me, and it's brought out a much more kind of meatier kind of low end on the snare, and kind of tightened up the sound. I'm just going to take it in and out again. Okay, and now moving over to the API. So again, different sound from the SSL. The EQs just sound different, and they just take you to different places. I'm going to bring in the dynamics here. So you've got this instant like smacky thing that you can get out of this that I could never get from this one. So that's useful if that's what you're after. Moving over now to the Focusrite. Really different again. And of course it would be different because I have not set the frequencies and the gains the same. But that's my whole point here, is that following what sounds nice on this, and I always kind of sweep things around until I find something that sounds good, takes me to a different place because it sounds different. The EQs sound different. Okay, compressor in. So again, really different from the others, but a nice range of different flavors in there. And then finally, I'm going to jump over to the Amek, and then I'll go around each one in turn, just so you can have a quick listen to all of them. Very different again. And now let's bring in the compressor. So like this has got a really nice tone to the snare. For me, I really like the way it tightens it up, but brings in that kind of like upper low end and the kind of high end snap all at the same time. It sounds like a nicer snare to me, a nicer, the quality of the snare was better. This is like, the drummer here is amazing, Asaf Circus. He's one of the great drummers, jazz drummers out there. But this was a recording session where the drum kit in the studio was not that great. Had really great heads and tuning. So Asaf brought his own heads and tuned it up. I mean, he's just amazing drum tune, tunes his drums to perfection. But the actual shells and the actual drums were not great. And so it wasn't, it doesn't matter how good your tuning is. If you don't have a great sounding drum, it's not going to sound amazing. Good, but not amazing. But to me, this one this got it closer to how I'd think of like a really nice quality snare drum would sound. So yeah, each one of these brings its own thing, and I'm now going to just jump through each one, starting with this one. So I hope, it was maybe useful thinking about why it might be useful to have a range of different console plugins. I mean, we've got this available to us. Why not use it? I find I immediately get different results just from using these. I hope that was useful, and if it was, please do give the video a like and ring the bell. And if you press the thanks button, that's really helpful and really appreciated. And hope to see you next time.